Here we go with some blue-red prowess action, and this hand looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and keep our opponent's mull to 6. This version of blue-red prowess isn't actually fully blue-red. There are a few black cards in the list, so I guess we can call it Grixis. And let's lead off on our Bloodstained Mire, hold up Wild Slash. It looks like our opponent's on a Mardu deck of some sort. As we see, Nomad Outpost. So we've got a bunch of different creatures we can play on our next turn. Let's just go ahead and crack the Bloodstained Mire and get a basic. And okay. So a couple options. I kind of like the Storm Chaser the most because it doesn't die to Fiery Impulse or Wild Slash. It has haste, and it's kind of our least important creature later in the game. I mean, it's a great card. It's one of the key cards of the deck, but we don't want to play Abbott right now because we won't be able to play whatever's flipped. And then as far as Jace goes, we don't want it to just die immediately. So I like playing the Storm Chaser, and then next turn, assuming it doesn't die, we can always make it larger with one of our non-creature spells. Mardu decks do traditionally have a ton of removal, though, so I wouldn't be surprised to see a removal spell. Let's see. Okay, Read the Bones. A little card advantage. So now we're going to have to figure out which creature we want to play on our turn. We can play Abbott, or we can just play Jace and play Slip Through Space. Yeah, I kind of like just playing the Jace and the Slip this turn. So let's begin with the Slip Through Space, just to get another point of prowess, fill up our graveyard. This deck does play 4 copies of Treasure Cruise. And we'll just play our Jace, get in for 2. And we've definitely got off to a pretty good start. Our opponent hasn't got a lot of pressure on us, which is nice. Still would expect maybe some removal. We don't know what creatures our opponent is playing. Could be flyers like Thunderbreak, Butcher of the Horde. P and Kieran is a pretty popular one, and now we see Haven, so that means most likely we are up against some sort of dragon deck. So it looks like our opponent believes the Storm Chaser Mage is a big threat. And there's the Draconic Roar revealing Thunderbreak Regent. So interesting that Jace is actually being allowed to stay in play. Little bit surprised by that. Let's go ahead and lead off on the Abbott. Yeah, let's try it. There's some cards we can hit that won't be good for us here, but I think we need to get another threat into play. Fiery Impulse was one of those cards we did not want to hit. So we have the option here. We can cast a Slip Through Space and get Jace flipped right away. Or we can slow roll the Jace a little bit and just simply loot. Our opponent could have another removal spell. I guess I kind of like looting here and flipping next turn. Okay. So we have the option here. I don't think we need another blue source. Let's get rid of the Sunken Hollow. And we're just going to play a land and pass the turn. Hand isn't great at this stage, but our opponent hasn't done a whole lot either. So not in a terrible spot. It's unfortunate that we hit the Fiery Impulse off of the Abbott, but sometimes that's how it goes. There's Always going to be some cards, unless it's really late in the game, when you play your Abbot, that aren't going to be able to be played immediately. So it happens. Our opponent has the option of just jamming Thunderbreak here, and it looks like that's what our opponent's gonna elect to do. We do have the option of just playing both of our shocks essentially to get rid of the Thunderbreak immediately. But we did draw an Abbot here. Let's go ahead and fire it off again, just like we did last turn. Hopefully we'll get something we can play. Okay, it's actually an Expedite. Interesting. Alright, let's play the Expedite on our freshly cast Abbot. Get a couple Prowess triggers in. And we can just sort of ignore this Thunderbreak for this turn, I think. So we can cast Slip Through Space. And so we have the option of turning on our Jace at any point. Our Abbots have gotten very large already, and we have just drawn a Titan Strength to make them even bigger. So unfortunately we've discarded our Sunken Hollow, which means we can't sack Bloodstained Mire for another blue source. Let's go ahead and loot. If we have another blue source, we can cast the second Slip Through Space, but we didn't draw one. Let's just discard a Fiery Impulse. And so yeah, let's just go ahead and make our attacks. If our opponent doesn't block, we can go ahead and cast the Titan Strength and deal just a huge amount of damage. I think we're going to cast the Titan Strength no matter what here. So we can just cast the Titan Strength now to save the Abbot, the Thunderbreak Regent's blocking. Alright, and we're still getting through for 5 this turn. And we've got a Jace that we're just going to tick up. Teamer Battle Rage, yes, let's keep that on top. We've still got 2 creatures in play. We had the option of Battle Raging the unblocked Abbot to get in for 3 more points of damage, but that would have mean that one of our Abbots would have died, and that seems like a bad exchange against Mardu especially, because one of the plays here is just killing one of our Abbots, or killing even both of our Abbots, and that would be annoying. We would have to draw more creatures, but we do have Treasure Cruise to gas back up, and we've got Jace, so I think we're in really good shape here. Ooh, Goblin Dark Dwellers, that's kind of awkward here for our opponent. With the Draconic Roar being 2 mana and our opponent already having played a land, it looks like this Dark Dwellers may just be coming down as a 5 mana 4/4 Menace. Not bad from our perspective. We may just be able to combo kill our opponent on our next turn through a series of... Okay, sorry. Draconic Roar is going to be able to be cast on the Abbot here. But if our opponent has a second Draconic Roar, it won't be able to be cast. Haven't played a ton against Goblin Dark Dwellers, but it is basically a Snapcaster Mage where you don't actually have to pay the mana for the spell. It's a great card. It's in a lot of the newer decks, newer versions of red decks right now, and the 3 damage was redirected to our Jace. So that's kind of bad news, but at the same time, we've got a hand full of spells, and we can go ahead and start unloading them and attempt to combo kill our opponent and just get this game over right here. So let's start off with the slip through space, and that's going to work out nicely. And now I think we can just go ahead and go for the win here by cashing our Jason for a Titan Strength, and there's not really much our opponent could have here. With 3 cards in the graveyard, that means we're not worried about Murderous Cut, and a Fiery Impulse effect won't be able to kill our Abbot. Our Abbot's also unblockable here, so what we can just go ahead and do is cast Titan Strength on the Abbot, and then follow up with a Teamer Battle Rage, and the Abbot's going to be more than lethal here. So, yep, looks like we'll be going to game 2. I mean, this deck is so powerful that in my head I was thinking when the Goblin Dark Dwellers was cast, oh wait, that's just a 5-mana 4/4 menace. Yes, it kills one of our 2/1s, but we still had one left, and we could just go ahead and combo kill our opponent with just 1 creature in play, and it wasn't really that hard. That's one of the strengths of this deck. We didn't even have to fire off that Treasure Cruise we had in hand to gas back up. We could just cash in the Jace, and that was enough. So, looking at the sideboard, Self-Inflicted Wound doesn't seem that great here. We didn't really see white creatures. There could be some in our opponent's deck. Roast doesn't really kill flying dragons. So, looking at some of the other options, we see Disdainful Stroke, and that could be a card we want to bring in. It counters some of the dragons. It also counters Goblin Dark Dwellers. And it looks like our opponent's kind of relying on big, clunky creatures to win, which is fine from our perspective. I think taking out a couple Fiery Impulses is fine. I don't know what small creatures our opponent is playing. We might actually just want to go ahead and board in the Duresses and the Negate, because it's likely our opponent's on a good amount of removal. We have a couple Wild Slashes that seem like cards we can sideboard out. Also not sure about Colligan's Command. We could also just board out 1 Slip Through Space, which seems fine. Not exactly sure what our opponent's up to. Another option is Outpost Siege. It allows us to play a grindier game, but let's just go ahead and try this. Our main deck seemed pretty well positioned against our opponents as long as we have a creature in play. So this hand is pretty awkward. We've only got 1 land. We do have a Jace and a Mage, but it's the kind of hand I think we want to take 1 mulligan with. If we had this and it was like a 6-card hand, you take away one of these spells, I think we'd keep. But I think for 7, I think we want to go ahead and mulligan. And this seems better. I don't think we want the Mountain. I think we want to just be digging towards cards like Treasure Cruise. This is the kind of hand where we do want a little bit more gas. And we'll see how good the Disdainful Stroke is going to be. I don't really know. Our opponent does have big threats, but it looks like we've drawn actually 2 copies of Disdainful Stroke. So we could play Sunken Hollow and then lead off on one of our 2-drops next turn. But let's just go ahead and play Swiftspear. Our opponent certainly could just Wild Slash it or Fiery Impulse it. But if it gets in and then we draw a blue source, that's best case scenario. If we have to just play Sunken Hollow on our second turn, we haven't seen actual 2-drops from our opponent. That doesn't mean that they aren't in the deck we're playing against, but we haven't seen them. So this could just be like a Draconic Roar on our Swiftspear or something of that nature. We'll see. This is only a 2-creature hand, and it's not as explosive as the one we saw before, because the nature of boarding in something like a counterspell is that we're not going to be as much of a combo kill deck anymore. So that's kind of the drawback. So yeah, we're just going to play Sunken Hollow and take things a little bit slowly. Play more of a control game. Looks like our opponent does have something. Hordeling Outburst is pretty annoying, not going to lie. So here we have a couple of options. We can just hold up Disdainful Stroke and take 3, and then play the Storm Chaser on the following turn. It's not great, but it may be our best bet. Yeah, let's go ahead and try it. It might be that our opponent isn't going to play a 4-mana spell, but we don't really know. So 3 goblins, though, that is pretty annoying. Against this deck, there aren't that many creatures, and our removal mostly trades 1 for 1, so... yeah, just get a basic mountain, I guess. Draw step was Collion's Command. Alright, I guess we're going to play out the Storm Chaser and hope our opponent doesn't kill it with like a Crackling Doom or something. I don't really love our spot at the moment, but didn't really know about the Hordeling Outburst plan of attack. And unfortunately, our opponent does have a Draconic Roar. We don't have anything we can play in response, which is a bit awkward. We do have instants in hand, but none of them we can cast in response to that Draconic Roar. So we may just die to these Goblin tokens. But at least we're going to get to see more of what our opponent's doing. That's the upside. But it's kind of an unfortunate spot, not going to lie. Not where we want to be. We can go ahead and Collion's Command away this Soulfire and bring back our Monastery Swiftspear for blocking purposes. So let's try to do that. Not sure it's going to work out very well for us, but I guess these Disdainful Strokes haven't really done anything this game. So we only have 2 in our board. We brought them both in because we saw Thunderbreak Region and Goblin Dark Dwellers in the first game, which makes a lot of sense, but here they seem kind of lackluster. It looks like our Monastery Swiftspear may be dying here. We know our opponent doesn't even have dragons in hand unless they drew one for the last turn, because they haven't been revealing dragons to the Draconic Roar. So I would guess something like a Goblin Dark Dwellers is what we're up against here. And there's the Murderous Cut. So hopefully if our opponent just slams like a Goblin Dark Dwellers on this turn, we're in a really bad spot. Any additional pressure is going to be hard for us to deal with. Now we can just go ahead and play Jace and pass the turn back. Jace can at least represent a blocker, but our opponent still got 3 cards in hand, and it's pretty likely one of those is just another removal spell, because Mardu traditionally has a ton of removal, but we'll see. Shambling Vents represents another attacker, so it'll be interesting to see which card our opponent elects to play, or if they just decide to attack with the goblins and pass the turn. So it looks unlikely that our opponent's going to play anything. Based on this line, yep, just passing the turn. So we drew Storm Chaser Mage. That's not a bad draw. Let's go ahead and get this Jace flipped now. And we drew Swift Spear. Okay. So I think we can afford to discard the Slip Through Space. And plus Jace on a Goblin. It still seems to make sense to hold up Disdainful Stroke. So we can just play Storm Chaser Mage and pass the turn. Even though the strokes haven't been good up to this point in the game, it's still pretty likely our opponent's holding like a Goblin Dark Dwellers in hand. Okay, Crackling Doom. Yeah, that's bad news for us. Our opponent just went ahead and redirected the 2 damage from the Crackling Doom right to us. There's a Duress. Okay. Duress is pretty annoying because now our opponent knows about these Disdainful Strokes. But it looks like the Expedite's what's going to hit the bin. And our opponent may just animate this Shambling Vents. Yeah. So we may just die here. Pretty unfortunate. Looks like we're going to probably take 4 this turn, going to 2. Yeah, there's a Slip Through Space, which isn't representing a whole lot here. Our opponent's pretty likely to just animate this Shambling Vent and kill us. Let's go ahead and fire off the Slip Through Space, I guess. Draw an additional card. Wasn't what we wanted. So we're at the point where we're just kind of hoping our opponent doesn't activate the Shambling Vent. But it seems very likely that that will happen. And so yeah, we'll just go to game 3. Well, our sideboard strategy didn't work out the way we wanted to. We can go ahead and board back in a couple Fiery Impulses. Dispel might even be better than Negate, for instance. The Whirling Outburst, though, in particular, was pretty annoying, so maybe we do want Negate. It's just hard because sometimes our cards just aren't going to match up the way we want them to. Do we want to board out the Disdainful Strokes? They were very bad that last game, but they do counter some of the most important cards we saw in game 1. So kind of a tough decision here. We also have Outpost Siege, another option in the board, which I kind of like. So maybe we can just try to board out some of our 1 mana action spells. And then some of our combo pieces, and just play more of a controlling game. Let's see. Seems like a reasonable strategy to sort of take out the Battle Rages and become more of a controlling deck. Not as explosive anymore. Yeah, alright, let's try it. Okay, this is a pretty good hand. Last time around we had to take a mulligan. This time we're keeping a pretty reasonable 7. We can search for a blue source with our Delta and then start deploying our creatures. And we'll see about this Disdainful Stroke. Hopefully it'll do something this game. Last game we had to stuck in hand, obviously. And now we do have access to black mana as well. And we just drew Duress, actually. So having access to black is going to be important. And we have the option here of which 2-drop we want to lead off with here. So let's go ahead and lead off with the Storm Chaser Mage. Our hand's so good that we actually don't really want to loot many of these cards away. And the Mage can get in for damage the fastest out of any of these cards. Although we are stalling on lands a little bit, so I think just attacking with the Storm Chaser and playing Jace for this turn makes a lot of sense. If our opponent kills the Jace, that's fine. We have a backup one, and we have a bunch more gas in hand. And if our opponent kills the Mage, then that's fine. We have Abbott, and we can play a longer game. Or our opponent could just play a Hordeling Outburst, but at least we're ahead enough so that we can try to race the Outburst in this scenario. So I don't mind the spot. Having the first threat in play is always going to be key in this sort of attrition matchup. In Game 1, we were the first player to have creatures in play. Then in Game 2, our opponent kind of had the first major play in Hordeling Outburst, and we never really came back from the Hordeling Outburst. So we'll see if our opponent can come back, but it seems like we've got the tempo advantage at the moment. And it looks like the Mage is what our opponent's going to decide is the most threatening of our 2 creatures. So let's go ahead and lead on Duress to see what our opponent's got. This way we know how good this Disdainful Stroke is going to be as well. And we actually see double Thunderbreak Regent, and then we see Kali and the Storm's Fury, Goblin Dark Dwellers, and Rose. So actually a very good hand that we're up against, but missing land. Interesting. So let's go ahead and take the Kalian's command. And we could go ahead and flip our Jace here by just go ahead and playing Slip Through Space and then flipping it. That would dodge the roast. And then we're just kind of hoping our opponent bricks on land. That seems like our best option here. It's not perfect by any means. But flipping Jace is always nice. This way we just don't... We know our opponent has Roast in hand, and now the Roast is something we can play around. But if our opponent just plays Thunderbreak Regent, it's bad news for us. And it looks like that is what's going to happen. Thunderbreak is a real problem. If our opponent had bricked on land or even just played a land that came into play tap that turn, that would have been much better for us. Unfortunately, not much we can do. So, yeah. Hopefully we can use our Disdainful Stroke this turn on maybe a Thunderbreak or something, but this is one of those games we may just lose to the Flyers. Okay, yep, our opponent's jamming Thunderbreak. It'll be interesting to see if our opponent opts to attack Jace or just goes straight to our face. Yep, straight to us. Makes sense. So we're gonna have to try to cobble something together pretty quickly here. Alright, let's lead on an Abbot. There's Outpost Siege. That doesn't do much for us. So if our opponent draws another land, we know that there's 2 5-drops we can't really beat realistically. We can flashback Slip Through Space, so let's do that rather than casting the one in hand. There's an Expedite. Okay. Well, if our opponent draws the land here, has an untapped land, we're almost just dead on the spot. Otherwise, we can do our best to race the Thunderbreak, but it's not going to be easy. So looks like our opponent's just dealing the 4 from the Thunderbreak straight to our face. And that's bad. Okay. Radiant Flames to clear away our creatures. Alright. We can try to rebuild a little bit here with an Abbot. Dispel isn't what we wanted, of course. We can cast our Expedite to try to get in some damage for this turn. Drew a Shivan Reef. So let's go ahead and cash in the Titan Strength in our graveyard. We can try to maybe Mize a win with this Abbot if our opponent has nothing. But we also know that our opponent does have Roast, so not great for us. But we're getting in for 7 damage this turn. Our flips with Abbot have been pretty unfortunate. And that 4th land is kind of what this game came down to. It looks like Soulfire plus Roast. I don't think we're going to come back from that. So, yeah, we're just going to have to concede here.